Beneath the shimmering elegance and regal smiles of the British monarchy lies a murky truth, shrouded in silence, where tired, broken bodies once resided, forced to bear the weight of an unforgiving lineage. For centuries, the crown deftly preserved a polished image, suppressing all that dared disrupt its facade. From hushed diagnoses to vanished heirs, this is the tale of 33 royals whose flaws were meticulously erased from the annals of history. Some were sheltered away, while others were simply erased, each deemed a burden too great to bear. Tonight, we unveil the layers of silk and gold to ponder a piercing question. What becomes of those destined to reign when their own bodies betray them? Before we delve into this dark chapter, if you are intrigued by the curious, the concealed, and the forgotten narratives of history, hit that subscribe button. This channel is where the veils of royalty begin to tear. And as you join us, please drop a comment below. Where in the world are you tuning in from, and what time is it as you listen? Let's discover who else is awake for a touch of royal revelation. First, we turn to Prince John. A fleeting figure in royal history, born in 1905, he was the youngest offspring of King George V and Queen Mary, a family steeped in duty and bound by the expectations of decorum. Initially, he seemed like any other royal, celebrated with grand ceremonies, captured in sailor outfits, and expected to perform with the sharpness of his siblings. Yet beneath the surface, a troubling reality unfolded. Initially dismissed as simply a bit slow, his situation worsened with alarming seizures, chaotic intrusions into a world where control was paramount. Doctors soon linked his condition to epilepsy, though few details ever surfaced, leading to a silence that echoed throughout his life. As time passed, Prince John's presence diminished entirely. By the age of 11, public outings ceased, and he gradually faded from the family narrative, often absent from photographs and ignored in conversations. By 1917, he was relocated to Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate, accompanied only by his nurse and a small group of caretakers. There, he remained, a ghost of his former self. Though Queen Mary visited sporadically, her affection was distant and clinical. King George V wasn't even present for John's sudden passing in 1919, sidestepping the unbearably painful reality. For a monarch who once reflected on his own fears of fatherhood, it was a silence that spoke volumes. Openly painful discussions were simply taboo, especially if they tarnished the royal image. Interestingly, the disappearance of Prince John was conducted with chilling efficiency. Devoid of scandals or whispers of cover-ups, he was discreetly tucked away until even historians struggle to outline his last years beyond vague mentions. In many ways, he became a blank space, defined solely by the absence of his story from the ideal of royal perfection. For decades, it was assumed that shame dictated this secrecy, a royal family concealing an imperfection. Yet a grimmer truth may have prevailed: indifference. Prince John wasn't shunned due to disability stigma. Rather, it was his lack of utility, his failure to embody the regal ideals, that made him disposable. Following his death, Queen Mary noted in her diary that it was a great relief. This sentiment likely stemmed not from a lack of love but rather from the comfort of eliminating the contradiction. The troubling tension between royal aspiration and human frailty was conveniently resolved. The child was gone, allowing the illusion to persist unbroken. However, once shattered, such illusions fail to fully mend. If the monarchy could neglect one of its own flesh and blood, what else lay obscured in the shadows of their legacy? Let's consider this. Prince John was not the only royal erased from the narrative. In just a few decades, within another branch of this complex family tree, 2 additional royal women would be similarly written out, not through death, but through institutionalization, existing yet effectively forgotten. In the tale of Narissa Lion, we discover a narrative that begins as an obscure family note but evolves into a poignant national symbol. Born in 1919, the same year Prince John passed away, her life appeared to mirror the royal family's discomfort with imperfection, seeking to bury its quiet tragedies. Narissa was the niece of the Queen Mother, making her a first cousin to Queen Elizabeth II. Unfortunately, she was destined to be both royal and invisible. Records of her early life are scant, and the few documents that mention her paint her as backward, a euphemism for someone who didn't align with societal or royal expectations. She and her sister, Catherine, were born with significant developmental disabilities, a reality that challenged the era's obsession with pedigree and decorum, spawning a reputational crisis. By the 1940s, the sisters had vanished from family events, omitted from letters and, tellingly, marked as deceased in Burke's Peerage, the authoritative guide to British nobility. While officially erased, they lived on, confined to the Royal Earlswood Hospital in Surrey for life, hidden away within a maze of institutional walls. This silence was no simple embarrassment. It was a deliberate and systemic cover-up. The sisters spent decades in the hospital, their true relation to the royal family unknown to the staff. Visits from family were non-existent, with only a single visit reportedly made by their mother, Finanella Bose-Lyon. Staff members described the sisters as sweet and loving, capable of experiencing joy within their limited reality, yet no royal figure ever crossed their threshold. When Narissa passed away in 1986, her grave was a modest one, identified only by a plastic tag adorned with a number. No headstone, no name, just another entry in the long ledger of institutional care. It wasn't until 1987 that journalists unearthed the sisters' story, revealing to the public that the Queen's cousins had been hidden in plain sight, their existence deliberately obscured to maintain the monarchy's facade of moral and genetic perfection. The subsequent outrage was met with the monarchy's typical sterile response, a few lines of regret, a nod to the differences in care standards back then, and then a resumption of silence. Beneath this bureaucratic calm lay a disturbing pattern. Just as Prince John had been quietly shunned for being inconveniently human, so too were Narissa and Catherine removed from the narrative for being inconveniently alive. The monarchy, it appeared, didn't merely hide its flaws, it actively erased them. However, the tale of Narissa is not solely about cruelty, it's also a testament to lineage. Both sisters descended from the same line as King George III, whose struggles with mental health gave rise to the cultural myth of the Mad King. Today, historians debate whether the family's secrecy stemmed from fear of stigma or fear of exposure, perhaps a combination of both. If the royal bloodline could harbor madness or imperfection, what would that imply for their divine right, legitimacy, and the perceived perfection that the crown relies upon? After the media uproar, Narissa's grave received a modest headstone, something of an apology but also a sobering reminder. Documenting a name on a stone doesn't restore a life to history after it's been erased. This brings forth an unsettling reality. The monarchy didn't simply overlook a cousin, it perfected the art of concealment. While Narissa and Catherine were sequestered behind institutional walls, healthier heirs stepped onto the gilded stage, perpetuating the illusion of an unblemished lineage. This leads us seamlessly to Catherine, the younger sister who shared Narissa's silence and exile, burdened by the uniqueness of royal blood that rendered her virtually invisible. And as we linger in the shadows of these unsettling tales of royal obscurity, remember to subscribe. We delve into the stories that history sought to bury. As you listen, share where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your part of the world. Let's discover who else is meandering through these forgotten corridors tonight. 3. Catherine Bose-Lyon. The tale of Catherine unfolds like a footnote that has been stretched into an entire existence. Born into a family destined to one day nourish a reigning queen, Catherine Bowes-Lyon shared blood with the very heart of Britain's royal legacy, yet she never stepped into the limelight. While the monarchy revelled in its grandeur, Catherine faced only the drudgery of paperwork. Where once portraits depicted joy, her world consisted of hospital invoices. This stark divide between familial ties and genuine care reveals the unspoken cruelty woven into her narrative. Younger than her sister Narissa, Catherine entered the world in 1926, just 7 years after her. In an alternate reality, family tales could have embraced her presence at christenings, weddings, and within cherished correspondences. Instead, Catherine, like Narissa, became a victim of the era's delicate euphemisms, described through backward, stigmatizing language that sanitized rather than honored her humanity. Labeled by physicians and esteemed relatives, the words became a grim justification for her removal. Institutionalization emerged as a solution of the day, serving both the family's reputation and the public image, providing care for those deemed unmanageable at home while concealing the inconvenient truths. For years, Catherine resided at Earlswood Hospital, a vast institution meant to provide care but paradoxically stripping life of its uniqueness. The hospital's regime imposed a strict routine, scheduled therapies, meals, and small pleasures, but it fostered a profound absence of familial closeness. To deem Catherine's existence as merely shameful would overlook a deeper wound, her obliteration from the family narrative itself. In Burke's Peerage, the authoritative account of aristocracy, both sisters were inscribed as deceased. This bureaucratic invisibility was no accident. It was a purposeful act, disguised as an administrative error, aimed at erasing perceived blemishes from the family's history. Yet, though the institution stripped away her name, it could not fully diminish her essence. Nurses remembered her as gentle and calm, able to find joy in fleeting moments, responsive to music, and warmed by the sunlight that filtered through institutional windows. She sewed and perhaps hummed quietly. Though these were not grand gestures, they illustrated a richly ordinary life lived beyond the reach of headlines. The caregivers who attended to her, though often overburdened, recognized her humanity and believed she deserved visits, letters, and meaningful touch, elements that remained absent from the royal narrative. In the late 1980s, when Narissa's grave and the existence of the Bowes-Lyon sisters slipped into public consciousness, the monarchy faced a revelation that felt like an undeniable stain upon its meticulously managed image. The royal family issued perfunctory sympathies, and the scandal gripped the media's attention. Critics questioned how such a public family could shroud itself in secrecy. Yet, like all scandals, the story eventually lost its potency. The public's interest waned, and Catherine and Narissa became cautionary figures, illustrating the monarchy's expensive facade. Catherine passed away in 2014, in a world that had changed drastically from her early years, her death slipping into relative obscurity. However, the fact that she reached the age of 88, outliving many of her illustrious cousins, adds complexity to her narrative of erasure. It suggests that despite the institution's intentions to obscure her presence, she experienced a full life. She had seasons, decades, and countless ordinary days that were hers alone. Catherine's existence quietly challenged the long-held notions of monarchy, myth, unbroken lineage, and an immaculate facade. She was not just a footnote. She served as proof that the narrative required revision. The editors who believed they could efface a name disregarded the enduring human stories intertwined with those lives. Even in silence, the ledgers of history raise echoes if you listen for the voices that dwell within the margins. The hidden reality of the Bowes-Lyon sisters represents a critical juncture, separating eras of obscurity from one of openness. And this transformation, from private erasure to public disclosure, will prove vital in the chapters to come. For as the century unfolded, the monarchy would grapple not only with the impulse to conceal but the choice to reveal. The next figure on our list will embody this shift, representing a modern royal who opts for honesty over hiding, and whose journey will redefine what it means to be a royal body that defies conventional expectations. In the grand narrative of modern royalty, Princess Eugenie emerges as a figure of quiet defiance. Born in 1990, she is the younger daughter of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, born into a royal legacy already burdened with the weight of public scrutiny. The expectations that accompanied her birth were monumental: grace, duty, and an impeccable posture. Yet, at the tender age of 11, a remarkable divergence unfolded. She was diagnosed with scoliosis, a condition that alters the spine structure, leading to pronounced curvatures that often necessitate surgical intervention. For Eugenie, this was no minor cosmetic issue. Her condition required metal rods and screws to be implanted in her spine, a serious and invasive procedure executed under a veil of secrecy. Unlike others before her, who were hidden from the limelight due to their conditions, Eugenie navigated her royal life under a shroud of concealment, keeping the details of her health largely unspoken. The public witnessed her at various royal engagements, always poised in elegant garments that cleverly obscured the scar from her surgery. In a world where the monarchy thrives on the imagery of perfection, Eugenie carried her hidden burden, her body silently supported by steel beneath her seemingly flawless exterior. The turning point came in 2018 during her wedding to Jack Brooksbank, a moment that elevated vulnerability into the royal consciousness. By choosing to wear a bespoke gown by Peter Pilotto that boldly flaunted her scar, she shattered royal conventions with subtlety. This choice was not an act of rebellion but a powerful statement. She embraced her scar, transforming it from a symbol of shame into a badge of pride. In doing so, she gracefully reframed the narrative surrounding physical scars, reminding the world that they speak not of flaws, but of resilience. Following this courageous reveal, Eugenie engaged actively in advocacy, lending her voice to scoliosis charities and encouraging young people facing similar challenges. This engagement was modern and strategic, yet beneath the polished surface lay a profound challenge to a monarchy historically mired in the need for physical perfection. For centuries, deviations from the ideal royal body had been excised from the public narrative. Eugenie's openness became a generational shift, taking ownership of her story rather than allowing others to write it for her. The very body that once faced concealment took center stage in a public celebration of love and acceptance, inscribing a significant moment into royal history. But despite this significant display of vulnerability, it remains essential to recognize that Eugenie's role within the monarchy is primarily symbolic. As a non-heir, she has the freedom to navigate the terrain of vulnerability, something the future monarch can ill afford. Yet, her presence marks a shift, an asterisk next to the long-standing ideals of perfection. The implications of her courage ripple outward dramatically, suggesting that if a princess can openly embrace her differences, then perhaps others who have felt pressure to conform may also find space to express their true selves. This intrigue invites reflection on another royal figure from history who faced his own struggles under the weight of familial expectations, not due to superficial scars, but because of hemophilia, a more covert and perilous condition. Far from merely a tale of elegance and fashion, the story of Princess Eugenie is an evocative reminder of the human experiences that lie beneath the regal facade. 5. Enter Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany, a marked embodiment of irony, born into immense wealth yet subdued by the very lineage that gifted him his fortune. In the year 1853, he appeared as the eighth child and youngest son of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, emerging from what could be described as the most medically intriguing royal family in European annals. Their bloodline was rich with offspring, international marriages, and enough inbreeding to raise eyebrows in scholarly circles. Amidst this peculiar history, Leopold found himself as the first confirmed royal haemophiliac, a diagnosis that would not just alter the course of his own existence but reshape the destiny of a dynasty. Haemophilia, a genetic ailment, sabotages the body's ability to stop bleeding. To the casual Victorian observer, it was subtle. No deformities or visible frailty marked his fragile condition. However, a simple fall or a harsh bruise could result in dire consequences. Labeled as delicate in childhood, this euphemism barely encapsulated his reality. His existence morphed into a delicate dance of caution. Rough play, horseback riding, military service, elements that bolstered masculinity and royal stature in the 19th century, were strictly prohibited, not out of malice, but necessity. Queen Victoria, though often resilient, was notably protective of Leopold. Her affection for him mirrored her own vulnerabilities, a bond forged from the understanding of fragility. She appointed him the unofficial family librarian, ensuring he received quality education and, at the age of 21, granted him a ducal title that afforded him respect outside the typical martial domain. Yet shadows loomed over his seemingly regal life. The intricacies of his health were well known among court insiders, though publicly sanitized narratives painted a different picture. Terms like delicate constitution glossed over the harsh reality of his condition. To the outside world, he remained the Queen's intelligent but slightly ailing son. Within royal circles, he was a constant logistical challenge. Travel required meticulous planning, and physicians were ever on standby. His marriage to Princess Helena of Waldeck and Pyrmont in 1882 marked a personal triumph as well as a precarious dynastic risk. They welcomed 2 children, ensuring that one, Princess Alice, would carry forward the haemophilia gene into future generations. Tragically, Leopold's life was cut short in 1884 at the tender age of 30, following a minor fall that led to catastrophic internal bleeding. Even in death, his tale resonated more as a whisper of caution than as a full-blown tragedy. Official reports highlighted his abrupt passing, yet over time, deeper insights revealed a more complex narrative. This was not just a singular event. Haemophilia had infiltrated the royal bloodline. Through Victoria's offspring, it seeped into the Spanish, German, and Russian royal families, quietly eroding their structures from within. So, what makes Leopold significant beyond mere medical discourse? He represents the initial rupture in the illusion of royal invincibility, where a bodily affliction stood defiant against the mythos of regal power. Rather than evolving their own narrative in light of this challenge, the institution resorted to familiar tactics, euphemistic language, and the gentle erasure of unflattering details. Yet, biology pays no heed to euphemisms, nor do genetic truths. Thus, we turn our attention to a monarch whose physicality would become a subject of endless speculation, distortion, and exaltation, a figure who transcended mere historical reign. Richard III, the king, the skeleton, and the lingering question mark. 6. Richard III. The tale of a royal figure whose remains have sparked intense debate and meticulous examination, a narrative steeped in intrigue. Ruling England for a mere 2 years, from 1483 to 1485, Richard met his end in obscurity, buried under a church that later became a parking lot. It wasn't until modern archaeologists with DNA technology and historical biases unearthed his remains that the real story began to surface. Here lies the conflict, a battle between myth and reality, a divide between villainous narrative and anatomical truth. In the historically sanitized version, shaped by Shakespeare's quill and Tudor propaganda, Richard emerges as a bloodthirsty usurper, a hunchbacked epitome of evil, twisted in physique and spirit. Such traits were seen as clear indicators of moral failure, and with the Tudors having seized his throne, they revelled in this portrayal. Yet, History is rarely that clear-cut. In 2012, beneath a Leicester parking lot, Richard's skeleton was discovered precisely as recorded centuries ago. The remains bore evidence of scoliosis, a curvature of the spine, not the exaggerated monstrosity of Tudor tales, but a legitimate condition nonetheless. He would have appeared shorter than his armor suggested. Though he may have had an uneven posture, he defied the grotesque caricature painted over centuries. Why was this distortion so pervasive? Because, throughout history, physical deformity has served as a compelling metaphor. In Richard's case, it was politically charged. Following their victory at the Battle of Bosworth, the Tudors needed to undermine Richard's legitimacy. Portraying him as physically flawed was their strategy. If his body was twisted, surely so was his claim to the throne. This age-old tactic blurred the lines between external appearance and intrinsic worth. The monarchy, obsessed with lineage, also craved visual perfection and regal demeanor, and Richard's scoliosis defied that ideal. Thus, the narrative warped further than his spine ever did, replacing reality with fiction. Even in death, Richard faced relentless scrutiny. His skeleton became a subject of public fascination. Reconstructions of his features, simulations of his spine, debates over armor tailored to his form, speculations and inquiries surfaced long after his passing. Ironically, the once obscure monarch is now examined more rigorously than many living royals. However, the revelation of his spine does not absolve Richard of villainy. Rather, it complicates the moral debate. If Richard was not as deformed as portrayed, does that lessen his villainy or simply make it more acceptable? This ambiguity reveals a crucial truth. Royal bodies symbolize narratives and propaganda, not mere flesh. Richard's scoliosis became a tool, a myth, a case study, not because of his condition, but because society found it advantageous to envision him as fundamentally flawed. But how does this narrative change when a royal figure's struggle is hidden from public view? What happens when the imperfections are subtle, the conditions chronic, and the responses carefully orchestrated? This brings us to the story of a king characterized not by physical deformity, but by a silent battle, George V. 7. George VI, an unexpected monarch, stepped into a role neither he nor the world anticipated. Born in 1895 as Albert, the second son of George V, he grew up cast in the comforting shadows of royal expectations, groomed for service but not for the spotlight. Everything changed dramatically in 1936 when his elder brother, Edward VIII, renounced the throne to pursue a controversial marriage to an American divorcee, thrusting Bertie into the limelight. Yet, beneath the royal facade, Bertie grappled with a staggering challenge, a severe stammer that transformed communication into a torturous endeavor. This was no mere hesitation. It was a debilitating block that plagued him daily, particularly poignant for a member of the stoic British monarchy. The public could sense the strain in his speeches, brief and labored, yet what lay behind was concealed: rigorous speech therapy sessions, grueling vocal exercises, and rehearsals into the late hours, all steeped in a veil of embarrassment. In an era when candid discussions about such ailments were taboo, the palace maintained silence on the matter. King George VI's struggles were not to be openly acknowledged. His imperfections brushed aside, reconstructed into tales of nobility instead. His speeches were reconstructed, pieced together for seamless delivery, their polished exterior hiding the tumult within. As World War II loomed, his voice transformed into a powerful symbol for the nation. This king, who once faltered in speech, was now expected to unite an empire. Against all odds, he began to find his voice, not perfect, yet infused with palpable effort and a new dignity. Each hesitant word became a powerful paradox, where perceived weakness burgeoned into strength, and vulnerability morphed into regal prowess, resonating deeply with an audience that admired his tenacity. However, his public journey wasn't solely defined by his stammer. As a child, George VI faced additional struggles with leg issues, requiring braces and therapy, challenges often cloaked in the narrative of a frail second son. The monarchy orchestrated a triumph narrative around him. The stuttering prince transforms into a steadfast king, a beacon of wartime spirit. Yet, the very essence of this story lay in the tension of his struggle, his humanity palpable as the nation held its breath, rooting for him to articulate his thoughts. The truth, however, was more tangled. His vulnerabilities were manageable, his imperfections repackaged as valor. But what if the narrative had been different? What if those flaws, unmanageable and visible, couldn't be neatly concealed? For a glimpse into that reality, we turn to his lesser-known sibling, Prince Henry, Duke of Gloucester, who grappled with his own persistent challenges, offering a poignant contrast to the narrative polished for public consumption. 8. Prince Henry, Duke of Gloucester. A figure largely overlooked in royal history, not due to scandal, but simply because he never conformed to the royal ideal. Born in 1900 as the third son of King George V and Queen Mary, he spent his life overshadowed by more charismatic siblings, destined to live in their glamorous reflections. In the grand family narrative, Henry was merely a figment in the background, dutiful, reserved, and often slightly awkward. Yet, behind the muted royal facade lay a man whose physique appeared to defy the expectations placed upon him. From a young age, Henry faced challenges with his physical growth. Historical accounts mention his condition known as knock knees, where legs bend inward, causing the knees to touch, while the ankles remain apart. While this might seem minor today, in the image-conscious Edwardian monarchy, it became a mark of visual discrepancy. For the royal family, physical symmetry symbolized moral superiority, and Henry, often stiff and unsteady, disrupted that image. To address his condition, he wore cumbersome leg braces, designed for alignment rather than comfort. The photographs from that era are scarce, none revealing the braces, with royal archives frequently sanitizing their visual history, leaving only polite references to his ailments and discomfort. Yet, behind closed doors, Henry's struggles lingered into his teenage years. He moved awkwardly, exuding less confidence than his brothers and consistently overshadowed in both ceremonial duties and familial expectations. Compounding his challenges, he faced speech difficulties, not a stutter like King George VI, but issues with articulation that necessitated guidance. His public speaking opportunities were few, tightly controlled, unlike his more charismatic siblings. Henry's unease with public life didn't become a tale of heroism. Instead, it remained understated, relegated to the background of royal narratives. As he matured, Henry found some purpose in military service, although his physical limitations remained a concern. He served loyally, though lived in the shadows without considerable acclaim. His duties were more ceremonial, attending events, inaugurating hospitals, and standing in for the crown when flair wasn't required. His flaws were accepted but seldom acknowledged. He was a fixture in the royal ensemble, included just enough to warrant a place. In many respects, Henry epitomized the weight of royalty more effectively than his renowned relatives. He bore the pressures of monarchy without the dazzle, accepted his flaws without mythologization. His unyielding body was the kind that the royal machine often struggles to accommodate, not tragic enough to inspire a rewrite, yet not exemplary enough to be celebrated. It's a narrative rooted in a legacy that traces back centuries, echoing the struggles of a queen whose body succumbed to decline, even as her power surged. A monarch, carried through opulent halls, swollen and limping, as the weight of a faltering empire pressed against her weary frame. Queen Anne, the reluctant sovereign of Britain, forged a crucial moment in history despite her physical struggles. Born in 1665, she ascended to the throne in 1702, yet her reign was marred by a constant battle against debilitating health issues. Suffering from gout, severe swelling, recurring fevers, and painfully swollen joints, her condition rendered governance a painful challenge. In her later years, she required a specially crafted sedan chair for mobility, a testament to her frailty. While portraits of and hinted at her struggles, concealing her health through layers of fabric or posing her hands to disguise her pain, the public perception diverged from her reality. Many contemporaries painted her as lethargic and incapable, her political adversaries branding her as unfit and governed by favorites. Yet, and persevered, giving birth to 17 children, most of whom tragically perished young. This personal anguish sparked national fears of succession, intertwining her private sorrows with the very fabric of the kingdom's stability. Despite her physical limitations, she navigated her duties, attending cabinet meetings from a cushioned seat, signing documents with trembling hands, and conducting state affairs amid relentless suffering. The official narrative rarely acknowledged her ill health, opting instead for a facade of silence and royal mystique, and embodied a profound contradiction. She held significant power while her ability to act was often compromised. Declared a figurehead of a unified kingdom, she battled the decay of her own body. Her reign, spanning 12 tumultuous years, was made more ironic by the fact that her lack of a surviving heir led to the end of the Stuart line and the emergence of the Hanoverians. This fragility not only reshaped the royal lineage but highlighted how biology, rather than scandal, could alter the course of history. Yet this was merely a prelude, as the next heir in line would face his own subtler, yet equally formidable, challenges. An emerging king whose early steps would be marked with uncertainty, and whose strength would feel elusive. In the unfolding saga of history, we encounter Charles I, a figure who, before losing his head, quite literally lost his footing. Born in 1600 as the second son to King James I of Scotland and subsequently James I of England, Charles never anticipated ascending to the throne. That destiny originally belonged to his elder brother, Henry Frederick, the Prince of Wales. However, with Henry's sudden death in 1612, the quiet and frail younger sibling unexpectedly became the heir, setting the stage for a myriad of complications, both on political and personal fronts. From a tender age, Charles was marked by weakness and instability. He took his first steps around the age of 3, a significant delay compared to his peers. Descriptions from the time reveal a child who was not just small and frail but also hesitant. His ankles caused particular concern, as they were so weak that attendants often carried him on a pillow. The exact cause of his struggles remained shrouded in uncertainty, whether it was a physical ailment, a neurological issue, or simply developmental delay. What is clear, however, is that Charles grappled with the physicality expected of a child born into royalty. In the opulent environment of James I's court, where grace was paramount, Charles's inability to embody such poise became a pressing issue. His difficulties extended beyond physical movement. He faced challenges with balance, communication, and establishing a commanding presence. His gait was uneven, his early speech somewhat strained, culminating in a stutter that lingered into adulthood. As any royal family might, he struggled to adapt, opting to downplay his shortcomings. They surrounded him with esteemed tutors and therapists, introducing what modern society might recognize as early intervention. Charles trained diligently to ride, fence, and dance, yet he often appeared more earnest than elegant. As he matured, he transformed into a solemn and dignified man, albeit devoid of natural charisma. He cultivated an aura of regality steeped in divine right rather than charm. By the time he reached adulthood, Many of his childhood afflictions had merely morphed into idiosyncrasies, yet those formative years left an indelible mark. Deeply self-aware and committed to formality, Charles became fixated on the image of a monarch. To mask his physical weaknesses, he ingrained himself into the belief of absolute monarchy, seeing royal authority not merely as a political stance but as a vital part of his identity. He grappled with the idea that while his body may betray him, his royal essence must prevail, a belief that would ultimately collapse. His reign, marked by civil discord and turmoil, culminated in a trial and execution, transforming the boy who once fumbled his way through palace hallways into a man faced with the stark reality of political consequence on a scaffold in 1649. No applause would greet him, rather the chilling echoes of history's judgment. The frailty of Charles I's childhood shaped a lineage of royals who misidentified physical weakness as moral failing. This intricate legacy would resonate through generations, impacting his son, who inherited not just a throne but also the shadows of early trials that now resided in his mind. Thus emerged James, the next chapter in a royal saga marked not only by crowns but by an enduring vulnerability that no title could shield against. In the late 16th century, the narrative of James VI of Scotland, later known as James I of England, unfolds as a tale of fragility within a tumultuous realm. Born in 1566 to Mary, Queen of Scots, and her ill-fated consort, Lord Darnley, he entered a world rife with discord and instability. Before he could grasp the weight of his destiny, tragedy struck. His father was assassinated when James was just an infant, while his mother faced imprisonment and execution. Far removed from parental nurturing, James was reared by regents, treated as a delicate asset in a world of political chess. From a young age, James's physicality seemed at odds with the expectations of monarchy. Diagnosed with health issues that plagued his childhood, he suffered from weakness in his legs, leading some claims to suggest he was carried until age 6. Even as he began to walk, he did so with a noticeable limp, his gait clumsy and unsteady, inviting ridicule and taunts. Chroniclers likened his movements to an ungainly shuffle, a stark contrast to the grace anticipated of a sovereign. While modern historians have theorized the possibility of conditions like mild cerebral palsy or childhood rickets, the absence of definitive diagnoses leaves us with more questions than answers. James' ill-suited physique shaped perceptions of his authority in a time when royal prowess was often measured by martial skill and commanding presence. His awkward stance and demeanor became a source of derision, yet he countered this with remarkable intellect. A man of profound learning, he was fluent in several languages and an avid writer, producing works that spanned theology, the philosophies of kingship, and even treatises on witchcraft. His keen mind, however, was often overshadowed by the physical caricature that clung to him. Ambassadors noted his restless fidgets, drooling, and miscalibrated gestures. Despite these challenges, James ruled effectively for decades, first over Scotland and then as the monarch of England and Ireland, uniting the territories under one crown. He fathered several children and survived numerous assassination attempts. Yet even amid political triumph, the shadow of his physicality loomed large. Many saw him as a king with unsteady legs, lacking the efficient grace typical of his predecessors. James' reign signified a transformative era, proving that intellectual authority could stand alongside tradition. Still, whispers surrounding his physical inadequacies persisted. In portraits, he often appears rigid and seated, his lavish attire artfully draped to conceal any imperfections. While the monarchy refined the art of visual representation, others at court, with their visible flaws, existed as objects of scrutiny, especially a certain powerful figure whose crooked spine told a story of struggle against the backdrop of political maneuvering. In the shadows of England's political arena stood Robert Cecil, the man destined to remain unseen in the resplendent court. at least not under the watchful gaze where elegance triumphed and perception could betray. Born to William Cecil, the esteemed chief adviser to Queen Elizabeth I, Robert arrived in a realm of power imbued with a stark disadvantage. His stature was small, his bearing hunched, and a pronounced curvature of the spine marked him, a condition that contemporaries might label a crook back, but was defined only through metaphor. In the court, where outward appearances dictated worth, his physicality became a target for mockery. His opponents, armed with words, likened him to a goblin or a spider. Ben Jonson dismissed him as the diminutive man, while others called him an elf. This visible deformity transformed into political currency, his crooked spine emblematic of crooked intentions. In the rich tapestry of court life, a deformed body was often equated with a deformed soul. Yet, behind this facade of ridicule was a keen strategist, a mastermind of empire. Cecil remained a loyal servant to Elizabeth, later transitioning to serve James I, deftly navigating one of the most intricate successions in English history. His diplomatic prowess prevented civil strife when the Tudor and Stuart lines intertwined. It was Cecil, with his flawed body and acute intellect, who uncovered the gunpowder plot in 1605, deftly orchestrating its aftermath. Despite his rise, Robert's physical form continued to serve as a liability. His portraits, fixed and formal, seemed to shy away from his true self, as if the artists feared revealing the truth of his body. Court gossip spun tales of his stooped posture as indicators of moral corruption, painting him as an unnatural figure. Cecil's intelligence might earn him admiration, yet it never allowed him to seamlessly blend into the mythos of a perfect statesman. His tale unravels a profound truth in the court of early modern England, where deformity and disability bore political weight, were molded into weapons, or conveniently erased. A crooked back symbolized a flaw in the body politic, and the more visible the imperfection, the more fervently the monarchy sought to imbue it with character. But what of the woman who bore flaws not in form but in flesh, one who couldn't be demeaned with crude metaphors? Enter Elizabeth I, Cecil's queen, who waged her own battle against the inexorable decline of her beauty with cosmetics, exquisite pearls, and a public persona as meticulously crafted as any battlefield. In the realm of monarchy where spectacle reigns supreme, Elizabeth II spent her twilight years engaged in a quiet yet relentless battle against her own body. Often enshrined in history as the Virgin Queen, a figure embodying national strength, ethereal grace, and untouchable beauty, Elizabeth transcended mere rulership. She was a symbol, carefully crafted for the public eye. Beneath the elaborate facade of makeup and precious jewels, however, her body was succumbing to change and decay, a reality the crown demanded remain hidden. Having survived smallpox in 1562, which spared her life but left indelible marks on her skin, Elizabeth faced an age that equated scars with shame, tying physical imperfection to moral failure. Her visage, once celebrated for its youthful allure, became a canvas requiring management. Thick layers of Venetian Suze, a toxic cosmetic meant to enhance her appearance, actually expedited her deterioration. The irony of the beauty regime was merciless, poisoning the very image it sought to preserve. Elizabeth's teeth, too, became a source of distress. Observers noted their loss and discoloration, likely the result of too much sugar and infection. As a consequence, she both withdrew from public speaking and concealed a smile. Though foreign diplomats expressed harsh criticisms regarding the disparity between the myth and the reality of her presence, within England, she retained control over her narrative. Before the dawn of photography, she choreographed how she appeared in public. Her royal image was meticulously sculpted, where unflattering portraits were banned, and only idealized depictions were permitted, allowing her physical decline to remain outside of public scrutiny. Within the sanctuary of her palace, Her attire became armor, wigs masked thinning hair, and voluminous dresses diverted attention from her aging form. In her later years, observers noted her growing melancholia, insomnia, and chronic pain, yet the performance of her role continued. She insisted upon standing for prolonged audiences, resisting the bed that would signify her surrender to the truth of her failing body. To Elizabeth, the display of power was entwined with her identity, functioning until it ultimately faltered. In her last moments, it was said she refused to allow anyone to undress her for bed, as if doing so would signal the end of the myth. When she passed in 1603, after an astonishing 44-year reign, her kingdom was more formidable than ever, yet her own frailty had been meticulously excluded from the narrative. This strategic silence around her decline was intentional. It was crucial for her image to achieve timelessness, regardless of her bodily decay. However, the imperfections in her facade carried significant weight. Following Elizabeth's reign, the belief in divine perfection began to unravel, revealing the monarch's humanity, once an unapproachable ideal, now visibly flawed. If the Virgin Queen could succumb to time, poison, and silence, the question lingered. What fate awaited a king whose vulnerabilities were on show, whose legs were marred by ulcers, and whose once majestic image now required layers of fabric, flattery, and denial to uphold? In the captivating saga of British history, one figure rises like a colossus, Henry VIII. By the twilight of his reign, he had transformed into more than just a monarch. He was a carefully crafted myth, woven from elaborate tales, ceremonial finery, political machinations, and a profound sense of denial. A titan of his time, Henry is immortalized as the personification of sovereign power, fierce ambition, and dynastic pursuit. Yet, beneath the grand facade, distorted by layers of regalness and theatrical confidence, lay a man grappling with the relentless deterioration of his own body. Born in 1491, Henry's physical prowess made him the quintessential figure of the Renaissance. With his tall, athletic build and captivating skills in jousting, hunting, and dancing, he exuded an image of vitality that his court eagerly lauded. In stark contrast to his cautious father, old King Henry VII, this vibrant young king embraced a boldness that was both brash and spectacular. However, fate dealt a cruel hand when a severe jousting accident in 1536 left him with a leg injury that worsened over time, becoming ulcerated, agonizing, and a source of persistent infections. His vitality began to wane, his movements grew sluggish, and the once heroic frame succumbed to immobility. As time passed, portraits depicted this transformation starkly. The dashing prince, once celebrated for his athleticism, morphed into a heavily cloaked sovereign, buoyed by elaborate fabrics and artistically enhanced appearances. Behind the opulent masks, an unkind reality festered. The royal court maintained an unspoken pact of silence. Publicly, Henry retained his role as the majestic king, ordained by divine right, drawing power from both bloodline and presence. Artists like Hans Holbein conspired to elevate his image, conspicuously excluding the aids he required for mobility and comfort. Privately, however, his agony was relentless. Infections raged, metabolic issues loomed, and his temperament grew increasingly unpredictable. His garments needed constant alteration to accommodate his expanding form, and he could no longer ride. Meetings fell shorter as he presided over his court from a chair. The myth persisted, for in Tudor England, the portrayal of royalty left no space for weakness. Kings did not limp, struggle, or reveal visible suffering. Yet, this facade had its repercussions. Henry's discontent influenced his decisions, leading to erratic governance as his court navigated the complexities of both policy and pain. Behind the layers of royal grandeur lay a gradual collapse that no silk robe could fully disguise. But what transpires when the fragility of a ruler is not veiled by opulent paintings or hidden from view? What happens when suffering becomes a quieter, chronic phenomenon murmuring softly within the palace walls? To unravel this mystery, we turn to his son, George IV, whose own vulnerabilities would whisper a different narrative into the heart of kingship. In the annals of history, few figures stand as enigmatically as George V, a monarch whose reign spanned from 1910 to 1936. Far from flamboyant, George was a man defined by his rigidity and his affinity for military attire, appearing eternally poised for ceremony. Unlike the charismatic Henry VIII or the captivating Elizabeth I, his legacy is shaped by endurance amidst the chaos of war, constitutional trials, and the unraveling of an empire. Yet, under this steadfast facade lay a frail body, gradually betraying him with each passing breath. Born in 1865, he was the second son of Edward VII, never destined for the throne until fate intervened with the untimely death of his elder brother, Prince Albert Victor. From his early days in the Navy to the dignified yet restrained king he became, George exemplified discipline, his demeanor reflecting a resistance to indulgence or display. Publicly, his life was governed by order, often to a harsh degree, while behind closed doors, his health unraveled in disarray. An inveterate smoker, his habit began to take its toll by his 50s, leading to chronic bronchitis exacerbated by the harsh English weather and decades of nicotine addiction. Images from the 1920s portray a man waning in strength, his features becoming increasingly gaunt and anguished. As his breathing grew labored, medical care was a delicate dance, overseen by Lord Dawson of Penn, who managed his deteriorating condition amid a silent storm. Official communications cloaked the severity of his illness, opting for euphemisms over stark truths, a necessity within the British monarchy that valued image above reality. As his health persisted on a downward trajectory, George often retreated to Bognor Regis, a coastal refuge believed to provide restorative sea air. Here, he battled recurrent bronchial infections, yet his vitality waned. Attendance at public functions dwindled until they ceased altogether, though he maintained a front of royal dignity in the face of suffering. The conclusion came in a manner that was chillingly subdued. George V passed away in 1936. However, it would take many years for the unsettling truth to emerge. His physician had hastened his death, administering morphine and cocaine, not for relief of pain, but to ensure his exit was reported in the morning press rather than the sensationalist evening tabloids. Even in the face of mortality, the monarchy prioritized public perception, masking George's illness, a slow and dignified decline shrouded in discretion. This set a precedent for the monarchy of the 20th century, dictating that chronic ailments should remain concealed, and that signs of decline were to be managed privately, all while projecting an image of strength until the bitter end. Yet, some royals, unlike George, refused to let their vulnerabilities linger beneath the surface, like Princess Alice of Battenberg, who, though deaf and isolated from music, insisted on her communion with the divine. Princess Alice of Battenberg, long before she became the mother of Prince Philip and grandmother to a future king, was born into a world of silence. Arriving in 1885 at Windsor Castle, this great-granddaughter of Queen Victoria embodied the intersection of British and German royalty, yet much of her life was marked by misunderstanding and neglect. From an early age, it was evident that Alice was different. She barely responded when her name was called and often seemed lost in thought. The reality, however, was far simpler and largely overlooked. Alice was nearly completely deaf. Her mother, Princess Victoria of Hesse, misinterpreted this inability to hear as a sign of mental slowness, but Alice was, in truth, bright and perceptive, simply unable to engage with the world around her. Eventually, Alice's condition was reluctantly acknowledged, leading to her being taught to lip-read in several languages, allowing her to navigate royal life with a semblance of normalcy. She married Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, embracing her role as a royal spouse with a diplomatic flair. However, the shadows of two world wars, coupled with the upheaval of the Greek monarchy, began to unravel her delicate stability. In the 1930s, historians describe what followed as a psychological collapse, during which Alice reported spiritual visions and claimed to receive messages from a divine source, retreating from her family. Labeled paranoid schizophrenic, she faced institutionalization in Switzerland, a decision made against her will, accompanied by a dismissive attitude from her mother regarding her situation. Yet, Alice's narrative didn't conclude in despair. Emerging from years of seclusion, she surprised many by evolving into a figure of profound strength and resilience. Embracing her faith, she founded a nursing order of Greek Orthodox nuns and returned to Greece during the Nazi occupation, where she bravely sheltered a Jewish family in her home. When confronted by the Gestapo, she cleverly played up her deafness to evade their questioning. In her later years, donned in a nun's habit and eschewing luxury despite her aristocratic lineage, she moved to Buckingham Palace at the invitation of her son, Prince Philip. Bringing with her little more than her faith, she transformed from a cause of embarrassment to one of quiet admiration within royal circles. Alice's silence, first enforced, then self-imposed, illuminates how the monarchy grapples with that which it cannot comprehend. Her deafness was ignored, her spiritual experiences dismissed as mere mental illness, and a woman deemed too unconventional for public life was quietly pushed away from the spotlight. Yet, beneath her profound devotion and unique quirks lies a troubling question often evaded by royal narratives. What unfolds when a member of the monarchy deviates from the expected pattern? After all, sometimes the suffering isn't overt. It manifests through invisible burdens such as debilitating headaches or chronic exhaustion, hinting at a mysterious inherited ailment that shadows a queen's legacy. Mary, Queen of Scots, a name echoed through history, a figure whose life was a grand tapestry woven with beauty, tragedy, and power. Yet, beneath the surface of dazzling spectacles, a somber tale unfolds, a tale of a body waging a relentless, unseen battle. Born in 1542, young Mary spent her formative years in France, groomed to embody Catholic royalty. Her elegance was striking, her charisma radiant. Foreign diplomats marveled at her charm, her linguistic prowess, and her ability to dominate any gathering. However, as she entered her 20s, shadows began to creep into her life. Unexplained physical afflictions emerged: persistent migraines, nausea, debilitating fatigue, and sensitivity to light. In poignant letters, she spoke of her torture, unbearable headaches, the need for darkness, and the incapacity to rise from her sickbed. These episodes were not fleeting. They hindered her capacity to govern, engage in negotiations, and fulfill her royal duties. In a monarchy demanding visibility, illness translated to absence, and absence heralded peril. Strikingly, her advisors seldom addressed these health issues in depth, often dismissing them as mere feminine troubles or emotional frailties, coded terms for the inconvenient and untreatable. Modern scholars and healthcare researchers have proposed that Mary might have suffered from porphyria, a rare genetic disorder affecting the nervous system, manifesting as photosensitivity, abdominal distress, and even mental turmoil. While this remains conjectural, the theory grows compelling when examined alongside her lineage, with instances of porphyria appearing in various royal successors, most notably King George III. The recurring symptoms, sudden attacks, light aversion, episodic pain, seem to connect the dots. Yet, what resonates deeply is not just the potential ailment, but the pervasive silence that enveloped it. Mary's struggles were often merged into narratives of emotional fragility and poor judgment, depicted as a queen led astray by her passions rather than by physical suffering. What if her setbacks were intertwined with her health? What if, within the cold, damp confines of a Scottish castle, besieged by political treachery and public expectation, her own body became an unwinnable battlefield? After her imprisonment, Mary's health deteriorated, and by the time of her execution in 1587, her myth had overshadowed her truth. While legends remain untouched by pain, her body bore its burden. In the annals of royal history, that silent agony, cyclical, largely unnoticed, lingers as a mere whisper behind the grand narratives. Such whispers, often dismissed as mere coincidence or rumor, gain a foreboding resonance when they endure across generations, a heralding, if you will, for those who chronicle the turmoil of royalty and the hidden afflictions of those once idolized. Henry IV, a complex figure in English history, was defined by many labels: a usurper, a crusader, and a master of political survival. However, beneath his royal accolades and armor lay a profound vulnerability, a narrative too often obscured by ritual, euphemism, and the medical understanding of the Middle Ages. Born in 1367, Henry Bolingbroke toppled his cousin Richard II in 1399, subsequently defending his claim fervently for a decade through combat and political theatre. Yet, beneath his bold exterior, a sinister unravelling was occurring. By the 1400s, he was besieged by unexplainable ailments, relentless fatigue, sudden collapses, disturbing lesions on his face, and troubling swellings. His condition often rendered him unable to travel or even attend court, and most notably, he would vanish from public view for stretches that could last weeks or even months. Observers noted his distressed state, describing him as afflicted and anguished. In the face of their king's failing health, medieval chroniclers resorted to their customary practices of masking truth with speculation and metaphor. Rumors abounded. Some claimed leprosy, while others hinted at divine curses or madness. Yet, the true nature of his ailments remains a mystery even today. Historians hypothesize that he likely suffered from a chronic skin condition, possibly psoriasis or severe eczema, aggravated by infections and cardiovascular diseases. One contemporary theory posits he may have experienced intermittent strokes, while another considers pheria. However, in the 15th century, the most alarming diagnosis was merely labelled as unclean, a damning verdict. The ideals of kingship required that a monarch embody not only legal authority but also divine purity. An ailing king became a crisis of representation, demanding concealment or reinterpretation through the lens of remorse. Consequently, Henry's condition was obscured, reframed as a matter of moral failing rather than medical intervention. In his later years, he became increasingly devout, retreating from the public eye and immersing himself in religious observance. Whether this shift was born out of spiritual consideration or physical necessity remains open to interpretation. What is undeniable is that the image of Henry transformed from a courageous warrior to a ghostly figure, one who was only spoken of in hushed tones and ultimately became a subject of lament. What renders Henry IV's tale disquieting is not merely the sickness he endured, but the way his court processed this reality, with silence rather than concern. Royal strength was paramount, and when it faltered, visibility faded alongside it. Yet, not every case of declining health could be reframed into a narrative of sanctity. His successor, Richard II, ironically the cousin Henry had dethroned, would leave an entirely different enigma in his wake. His reign devolved from poetic flourish into suspicion, his peculiar behaviours hinting that perhaps it was not his body in disarray, but rather his mind that lay troubled. Richard Cern's examination of Richard II reveals a life steeped in contradiction and opulence. Ascending to the throne as a mere child in 1377 following the deaths of both his grandfather, Edward III, and his father, the esteemed Black Prince, Richard was a king uniquely positioned between the divine and the human frailties that would ultimately unseat him. His reign was characterized by spectacle, adherence to ceremony, yet fraught with insecurity, his existence shaped not merely by governance but by the optics of kingship. Beneath the surface, however, lay an unsettling dissonance. Contemporary chroniclers were at a loss, labeling him as sensitive, whimsical, or increasingly unstable. Richard's emotions, intense and untamed, made him unpredictable. One moment benevolent, the next vindictive. This erratic temperament was ill-suited for the demands of medieval politics. As he moved into his 20s, whispers of his volatility grew louder. He distanced himself from his advisors, made capricious proclamations, and exacted severe retributions for minor offences, while his opulent attire and obsessive collection of relics drew further scrutiny. Rumours circulated that he spoke with saints and statues, behaviours that in a pre-psychological age were dismissed as vanity or tyranny, yet today suggest deeper mental health issues, perhaps bipolar disorder or a complex neuropsychiatric state exacerbated by isolation and trauma. Faint records hint at physical manifestations of distress, fainting spells, sleeplessness, inexplicable exhaustion, alongside complaints of chest tightness and profound melancholy, terms that hinted at depression. Yet, in the rigid hierarchies of the 14th century, a king could not be mentally unwell without it adversely impacting the state he governed, thrusting Richard's internal decline into political peril. In 1399, his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, who would become Henry IV, exploited this precariousness, leading to Richard's capture and deposition. In the aftermath, he reportedly succumbed to a deep, silent despair, refusing sustenance and guidance, his last days at Pontefract Castle shrouded in uncertainty. Some say he was starved, others claim he simply refused to eat. Richard's narrative concludes in tragedy, with yet another royal life reshaped for the sake of stability. His tale is haunting, not only for its descent but for how quickly his intricate humanity was transmuted into a portrayal of divine failure. His emotional turmoil became sin, his sorrow transformed into weakness. Instead of a nuanced case study, history framed him as a cautionary figure. Yet Richard's reign birthed an unsettling realization, the understanding that kings, too, could be mentally vulnerable, that the divine right of rule coexists with a fragile human psyche. This idea would persist beyond Richard, resonating through the ages, reappearing in the haunted legacy of another young ruler, Henry IV, whose battle-scarred visage became both shield and legend. Thus, we unearth yet another chapter of royal history in the shadows. Edward VI, often regarded as the frail boy king, presided over a brief reign sandwiched between two formidable Tudor queens. Born in 1537 to the infamous Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, he emerged as a beacon of hope for a dynasty desperate for a male heir, yet his fragile constitution belied the heavy responsibilities expected of a monarch. Much of what we understand about Edward's health is derived from Tudor historians, diplomatic accounts, and the whispers circulating among courtiers, none of which delve deeply into the youthful soul burdened by royal expectations. Within these meticulously crafted narratives, the signs of his frailty emerge: a delicate figure, often wearied, with slender limbs and erratic appetite. While lacking notable deformities, Edward appeared to grapple with ongoing minor ailments that rendered him susceptible to the rigors of kingship, fatigue, vulnerability, and the lengthy absence from the spotlight of courtly duties. Modern historians have scrutinized portraits of the young king, noting a possible asymmetry in his shoulders, hinting at conditions like scoliosis, though the nature of art in that era was more about ambition than accurate representation. As Edward reached his early teens, the decline in his health became increasingly apparent. His pallor intensified, coughing fits became frequent, and his attendance at court functions dwindled. By early 1553, just months before his untimely death, he had all but disappeared from view. Officially, he succumbed to consumption, the bygone term for tuberculosis. Yet historians speculate whether this diagnosis fully encapsulates his plight. His last days characterized by rapid deterioration, skin discoloration, labored breaths, and an almost complete physical collapse. In the shadows of Hampton Court, the court sought to shroud the extent of his illness, for a frail monarch at a tender age contradicted the image of vitality the Tudor regime aimed to portray. Thus, Edward faded into obscurity, even as his reign grew ominous. His rule existed on the surface while powerful adults clashed behind the scenes in struggles of faith, governance, and succession. His frail body, though a symbol of Protestant aspiration, was misused and idealized despite its weakening state. Upon his passing at just 15, the desperate regime hurriedly positioned Lady Jane Grey to ascend, attempting to sidestep his Catholic sister Mary. In death, Edward's legacy morphed into a fierce contention. The silence surrounding his health, the palpable decline of a youthful ruler, established a haunting precedent. The crown proved once more to be resilient, overshadowing the fragile being beneath it. In stark contrast to Edward's hidden suffering, the next in line would bear the unmistakable scars of conflict, a warrior king marked by battle, his crown precariously balanced atop a head forged by war. In the annals of history, one figure stands out as a beacon of English chivalry. King Henry V, revered as the heroic warrior, he stands tall in Shakespearean tales and the national consciousness. It was he who emerged victorious at Agincourt, transforming a faltering dynasty into a formidable continental presence. Yet, behind the admired facade of this steel-eyed ruler lay a testament to the human experience. His body, scarred and marked by the brutality of battle. Born in 1386, he entered the fray long before he would have been eligible to cast a vote in present-day politics. By the tender age of 16, he had already tasted the chaos of conflict at the Battle of Shrewsbury in 1403, where fate dealt him a cruel blow. An arrow pierced his face, a moment that would forever shape his legacy. This arrow, buried perilously close to his brain, might have sealed his fate, but instead, he triumphed against the odds. Surviving a harrowing surgical extraction, he emerged from the ordeal, his name forever associated with invincibility. Yet, the scar remained, a silent witness to his pain. Interestingly, while historical records provide little detail on his injury post-Shrewsbury, artistic portrayals during his reign often avoided close inspections of his visage. Known for their rigidity and stylization, the portraits curiously lacked lifelike precision, perhaps intentionally sidestepping the visible evidence of his war-torn face. For a ruler who endeavored to project strength and moral superiority, visible scars could pose a stark contradiction. A king's countenance was meant to exude divine grace, not the reminders of insurrection. Yet, in this duality lay a deeper narrative. Rather than concealing the imperfection, Henry seemed to embrace it, wearing his past like a badge of honor. He became the prince who bled for his realm, a warrior king who showcased his battles on his very skin. This became an integral part of his royal image, even as opinions on the appearance of his scar varied widely. As he claimed victories in France, bringing the English monarchy to unprecedented heights, his physical health waned. In the twilight of his life, Henry faced persistent ailments, likely a result of dysentery or chronic infections common to those who led warriors into battle. At the mere age of 35, his life was abruptly cut short during a French campaign, leaving behind a newborn heir and an empire tenuously held together by fatigue and faltered triumph. His death marked a significant fracture in England's history. Here stood a king who epitomized might, yet bore the constant burden of injury. He ruled not by defiance of his scars, but through their presence, transforming suffering into a symbol of leadership. However, when the pain became too pronounced to ignore or embellish, the crown inevitably shifted to the next line, finding its way to a prince who would grapple with his lifelong ailments, a subtle, yet poignant reminder of a legacy fraught with inherited turmoil. Edward, the Black Prince, awaited in the shadows. Edward the Black Prince, formerly known as Edward of Woodstock, never ascended to the English throne, yet his formidable presence loomed over it. Born in 1330 as the firstborn of Edward III, he was endowed with royal lineage, a keen military mind, and an extraordinary charisma that captivated historians. His triumphs at the battles of Crécy and Poitiers became ingrained in the national consciousness. Yet, beneath the shining armor and grand titles, a harrowing reality awaited, a slow, unrelenting illness that quietly encroached upon his legacy. In his youth, Edward epitomized vitality. His stature, vigor, and ruthless prowess in battle illuminated the ideal of kingship long before he ever donned a crown. The warrior prince carved his way through France with almost legendary precision. However, around his mid-30s, the tides began to shift. The signs of weakness, subtle yet concerning, started to manifest. Accounts from his later years depicted him as pale, frequently fatigued, and increasingly unable to fulfill his leadership duties. He withdrew from the hustle of court life, handing off responsibilities and limiting his public appearances. What once felt like ordinary battles began to engulf him. By 1371, he had to forfeit his title as Prince of Aquitaine and return to England, diminished and unwell. The nature of his illness remains a hushed enigma in royal history. Some scholars theorize tuberculosis, while others cite chronic dysentery from his military endeavors. A few suggest nephritis or even repercussions from malaria. Regardless of the root cause, the symptoms told a consistent tale: debilitating tiredness, significant weight loss, and a gradual decline in physical health. The commanding figure who once rode with authority was increasingly absent from public life, often attending solemn occasions where his frailty was unmistakable. Yet, the myth of the Black Prince persisted through portraits, tomb effigies, and heraldic imagery, portraying him as the undefeated hero who remained unscathed. But behind the glorious facade, the real man was withering away. When he passed in 1376 at just 45 years old, 1 year before his father, his death wasn't due to a hero's battle, but rather the lingering grip of an insidious illness. This demise left a significant void in the realms of politics and military strength, and his son, the future Richard II, would inherit a throne burdened with expectations that loomed large. This is where we discern the paradox. Edward had earned accolades as the quintessential royal warrior, yet he succumbed, not by sword, but to an encroaching malady the medieval court could neither identify nor master. This invisible adversary eroded the legacy forged in steel and ceremony. Astonishingly, centuries later, a similar affliction would again weave through royal bloodlines, not through conquest but through the delicate threads of genetics. The names may change, and the diagnoses whispered, but the weight of silence would remain just as profound. This same affliction would become evident in another prince nearly 6 centuries later. Prince William of Gloucester, at only 23, embodied the promise of a vibrant monarchy, radiating charm and vigor. A descendant of George V and a first cousin to Queen Elizabeth II, he was born in 1941, cultivating a life full of adventure. This young prince was not just an aristocrat. He was a pilot, a mountain climber, and a diplomat fluent in Japanese, with a captivating smile that made him a natural for magazine features. Yet beneath this polished facade lay a hidden truth, a hereditary condition shared among his kin, a royal affliction too troubling to reveal. Diagnosed with porphyria in 1968, at 27, while serving in Tokyo, He faced a rare and intricate metabolic disorder, marked by a host of debilitating symptoms including abdominal pain, neurological complications, and photosensitivity. Throughout history, such disorders have been linked to notorious figures like King George III, fostering a fascination with the intersection of madness and monarchy. For William, however, this was no mere historical footnote, but a stark reality. The royal family's signature reticence kept his diagnosis from the public eye, allowing him to maintain his roles and pursuits without the burden of scrutiny. In a world where perceived imperfections could spell scandal, William and his family chose silence, carefully managing the narrative. Despite his disciplined approach to managing porphyria, its unpredictability loomed, casting doubts about its hereditary nature and lingering implications on the royal lineage. Tragically, his life was abruptly cut short in 1972, merely 4 years after his diagnosis, when he perished in a plane crash during an amateur air race at the age of 30. Authorities attributed the tragedy to pilot error, dismissing any connection to his health plight, allowing the palace to shield the royal family's image once more. The focus shifted from his condition to the accident itself, leaving William's legacy shrouded in silence, an emblematic figure, promising yet quietly suffering, now lost to public memory. His story hovers at the periphery of royal history, intriguing yet unsettlingly unresolved. Strikingly, this tale does not conclude with his untimely death, but rather echoes in the ongoing narrative of the royal lineage, as whispers of the same affliction haunt the lineage like a shadow, persistent and ambiguous. Return to the previous generation, and you will find hints of similar struggles woven within the fabric of a royal woman, ensnared between continents and empires, embodying the unvoiced symptoms of a storied but troubling legacy. In the grand tapestry of history, Princess Victoria, known as Empress Frederick, emerged as the firstborn of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert in 1840. With the weight of destined greatness looming over her, Victoria embodied the traits necessary for an empress. She was astute, articulate in multiple languages, and raised to foster connections between the powerful realms of Britain and Prussia. Her union with Crown Prince Frederick of Prussia in 1858 positioned her as a beacon of progressive change, enlightenment, and diplomatic ties. Yet, the very vessel that carried her into this intricate marriage soon became a subject of hushed speculation, turmoil, and an enigmatic legacy. For the majority of her life, the world celebrated Victoria's vitality and sharp intellect. However, amidst the accolades, her personal correspondence and biographical narratives reveal unsettling hints of bizarre afflictions, intermittent weakness, severe abdominal discomfort, nausea, a sensitivity to light, waves of fatigue, and episodes of psychological strain often appearing and receding unpredictably. She penned descriptions of profound exhaustion, paralysis that could last for days, trembling hands, and flushed skin, while physicians attempted to diagnose her condition, attributing it to neuralgia, stress, or female hysteria, yet achieving nothing resembling certainty. In the realm of speculation, some modern historians have ventured the theory that Victoria may have grappled with phyria, an insidious and potentially hereditary condition linked to other members of her noble lineage, including George III and Prince William of Gloucester. This proposal aligns ominously with the myriad of strange ailments Victoria described over her lifetime. If substantiated, it would weave another compelling chapter into the largely obscured tale of the royal family's encounter with an illness that defies clear diagnosis and predictable narrative. However, during her lifetime, terms such as phyria remained shrouded in silence. The social mores prevalent in the Victorian era were ill-suited for medical honesty, especially regarding a woman destined for an imperial role, representing grand political ideals. Her symptoms were often recast as mere stress from navigating her challenging status in Prussia. She faced criticism for being too English, overly liberal, or too outspoken for the rigid confines of the Prussian court. Thus, her body and her political identity were treated as irritants. As Empress of Germany for a mere 99 days until her husband Frederick's demise, Victoria found scant opportunity to influence imperial policy. The twilight of her life was marred by grief, political marginalization, and a rift with her increasingly autocratic son, Wilhelm II. Her health dwindled as she battled breast cancer, and in 1901, she passed away the same year as her mother. Yet, the unresolved nature of her earlier, bewildering symptoms lingered silently, woven into the larger narrative of royal endurance. Victoria's life encapsulates a world of contradictions, a woman of exceptional intellect hindered by her frail body, a princess destined to unite nations, yet ultimately divided by the conflicts within her own family and possibly her own genetic lineage. This lineage, instead of dispelling the mystery, carries it forward, manifesting through swollen joints, vanished pregnancies, and the peculiar limp of a queen consort, her legacy often overshadowed by her struggles rather than defined by them. Next, we encounter Anne of Denmark, a queen consort woven from contradictions. She entered Britain in 1589 as part of a strategic marriage to James VI and I, bringing her Lutheran roots, a taste for theatricality, and a body that clashed with the royal image. Draped in jewels and silks, she battled constant, underlying health issues that would come to define her darker narrative. Historical accounts reveal a woman grappling with recurrent ailments, compounded by age, notably gout and dropsy, a condition marked by swelling due to fluid retention, likely symptomatic of heart or kidney troubles. In the cloistered world of the court, and became a figure of both fascination and concern. Letters recalled how she needed to be transported between rooms and often missed functions due to her delicate state. While such struggles may seem commonplace in royal life, they posed a threat in a monarchy that thrived on the illusion of strength and stability. A queen's physical frailty, particularly in the wake of failing to produce healthy heirs, was deeply problematic. Queens embodied continuity and divine approval. A limp or swollen visage jeopardized this crafted image. As the early 1600s unfolded, her health declined further. Reports revealed she faced severe limb pain and mobility challenges, prompting speculation about rheumatoid arthritis or complications from her earlier pregnancies. She endured the loss of 4 out of 7 children, which weighed heavily on her spirit. Once a vibrant figure enlivening the court with her artistry and charisma, and withdrew, her vitality fading. Yet the royal facade demanded she remain composed. Her portraiture shrouded her in dignified grace, masking the reality of her physical pain. Even as her condition deteriorated, she insisted on attending important court gatherings, often needing assistance to merely be present. By the time of her death in 1619 at the age of 44, official reports were succinct. No grand displays of grief or scandal unfolded, just the passing of one more royal, lost amidst a culture that preferred the gloss of silence over the weight of truth. Anne's legacy endures in both artistry and architecture, but also as a reminder of how her body became an obstacle to the narrative, where pain was wrapped in the cloak of silence. Next, we turn to Mary I, infamously dubbed Bloody Mary. Unlike Anne, she left no heirs but rather a murky mystery encircling her figure. Her physical presence, more than her claim to the throne, became the core enigma of her story. Mary I of England, often referred to as Mary the Warrer, was the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Her reign, marked by flames, burnings, and executions, is remembered for the fierce re-establishment of Catholicism in a Protestant England. Yet, beneath this tempestuous legacy lies a deeply personal and unsettling enigma, a silent struggle between her physical existence and her royal title. Her reign, spanning just 5 short years, is overshadowed by a lifetime marked by physical turmoil and reproductive uncertainty. Born in 1516, Mary was once deemed the prized heir of Henry's royal court, distinguished by her remarkable intelligence and political insight. However, her fortunes changed dramatically when her mother's marriage was annulled and Anne Boleyn ascended to replace her. In an instant, Mary was labelled illegitimate, stripped of her rights, and separated from her household, a demotion that carried heavy physical ramifications. As she grew, accounts describe her grappling with relentless illnesses, severe headaches, and menstrual irregularities, symptoms that some scholars suggest may hint at conditions like endometriosis or hormonal imbalances, although conclusive evidence remains elusive. Yet, the heart of Mary's health mystery intensified during her turbulent reign. In 1554, just after her marriage to Philip II of Spain, she proclaimed her pregnancy. Her abdomen swelled, menstruation ceased, and the court buzzed with preparations for a royal birth. Nurseries donned festive decorations, midwives were summoned, and astrologers consulted, but ultimately, no child arrived. The symptoms seemed irrefutable, monitored by physicians and courtiers alike, and the nation anxiously awaited an heir to secure the Catholic lineage. What unfolded, however, appeared to be a false pregnancy or, perhaps, a psychosomatic condition that today might be identified as pseudocyesis. She fully embraced the notion of motherhood, only to face the cruel twist of reality when her hopes vanished. This cycle repeated itself in 1557, as Mary once again believed she was with child, only to find herself devoid of a living heir. Identifying the causes behind these experiences, whether rooted in illness, stress, or reproductive ailments, remains a challenge for historians. What's certain is the devastating emotional and political toll they took on Mary. Her inability to produce an heir eroded her power and fueled the Protestant narrative that branded her as cursed or unworthy. Mary passed in 1558, with theories suggesting uterine cancer or chronic infection as potential causes. Leaving no child or legacy of stability, her rule was marked by suffering. Her body acknowledged more for its shortcomings than its endurance. With her story came an unsettling question that would resonate through future monarchs, not just those without heirs or deemed unfortunate, but those whose bodies silently succumbed to decline, their royal bloodlines enduring long after their physical forms faded. The next notable figure to grapple with such a fate was Charles II, known as the Merry Monarch, yet shadowed by an equally troubled medical history. Charles II, often hailed as the captivating comeback king, made a striking return to the throne following a 10-year stretch of Republican rule. With remarkable flair, he not only reinstated the monarchy but also transformed his court into a vibrant hub of revelry and wit. However, beneath this grand facade of restoration and royal charisma, lay a body that struggled to uphold the very myth Charles had woven around himself. Despite appearing majestic in portraiture, this king was quietly deteriorating. Born in 1630 to Charles I and Henrietta Maria, Charles II spent much of his early life in exile, witnessing the turbulent demise of his father from a distance while navigating the treacherous politics of foreign courts. By 1660, at the age of 30, he returned, a tall and athletic figure, radiating the worldly charm that England had long missed. He revelled in dance, horse racing, and witty exchanges, surrounded by a host of mistresses, reinforcing his image as the indulgent monarch. Yet, the reality was far less robust. Signs of chronic fatigue, digestive issues, skin complaints, and vague disturbances hinted at deeper ailments. He frequently endured debilitating headaches and sleepless nights. There were whispers of gout and potential kidney or liver problems, exacerbated by a diet high in sugar amidst the medical ignorance of the time. Modern historians even speculate about genetic conditions influencing his health. Charles fathered numerous illegitimate children but failed to produce a legitimate heir with his wife, Catherine of Braganza. This absence of an heir cast a shadow over his reign. Was it merely fate, Catherine's infertility, or a hereditary issue on his part? The truth may forever remain a mystery. The urgency of succession loomed larger after his death, especially as his health visibly deteriorated by early 1685. Sudden convulsions, likely caused by kidney failure, marked his final days. His death was abrupt and chaotic. Royal physicians resorted to bloodletting, blistering, and enemas, to no avail. Charles passed away at 54, reportedly declaring, "I am sorry, gentlemen, for being such a time of dying." This statement, though too poetic to verify, encapsulated his life, a performance sustained even into death. The glamour, wit, and charm masked a lingering physical decline that the monarchy preferred to ignore. Thus, the Restoration concluded not with a scandal, but with the quiet collapse of another royal figure behind a curtain of ceremony. Yet, the legacy of concealing decline would endure. His brother James II was left to inherit not just the throne, but the weight of a compromised body untrusted to rule without instability. James II, the younger sibling of Charles II and the final Catholic monarch of England, was a figure overshadowed by instability. Seated on the throne, he grappled with the very faith that posed a threat to him, and perhaps troubles within his own frail body. Born in 1633 into a royal lineage teetering on the edge of disaster, James navigated the tumultuous waters of civil war, exile, and a fragile restoration, ultimately meeting his deposition. His existence was defined by unrest. His health, too, mirrored this turmoil, delicate and hidden, often eclipsed by the grander spectacles of political and religious strife. Unlike his charismatic elder brother, James remained outside the court's limelight, more pious, more composed, burdened by the heavy cloak of royal expectation and legitimacy. Yet even in youth, he displayed a physical fragility. He endured recurring bouts of illness often dismissed as mere fevers, yet they returned with unsettling consistency. His pallor, erratic stamina, and the challenges of upholding the regal facade were marred by what historical accounts referred to gently as attacks. Modern interpretations speculate that James may have wrestled with gout, kidney stones, or cardiovascular issues. Reports noted leg swelling, difficulties in maintaining posture, and episodic weakness, conditions exacerbated by a lifestyle heavy with ceremonial duties and prolonged periods of inactivity. Though these ailments did not spark courtly scandal, they gradually eroded his presence. More captivating is the notion of a deeper hereditary issue, possibly a rare disorder linked to James through whispers of history. While definitive evidence is elusive, the symptoms he reported, abdominal irritation, limb pain, hypersensitivity, and mood fluctuations, echo modern medical criteria in disquieting ways. Ultimately, James' legacy would be more profoundly influenced by his political maneuvers than his physical decline. His unabashed Catholic faith, efforts to bolster royal power, and the birth of a son in 1688 instigated a full-blown legitimacy crisis. Fearing a Catholic dynasty, Protestant nobles summoned William of Orange to intervene. James fled, effectively abdicating amidst political turmoil, paranoia, and a body that no longer projected the vigor his station demanded. In exile in France, James spent his final years shrouded in relative anonymity, still claiming kingship and divine right as he faded from the throne spotlight. His health spiraled, worsened by the stress of displacement. He passed away in 1701 at the age of 67, a mythic figure slowly overshadowed by the very ideals he sought to uphold. James' quiet decline serves as a poignant reminder that the fall of royalty often transcends mere politics, rooted instead within the blood, bones, and veins unseen maladies that remain unnamed and never fully resolved. This silent unraveling would find its most notorious expression in the troubled shadows of his descendant, George III, whose afflictions would reshape the concept of royal sanity forever. George III stands as a figure etched in history, marked forever as the monarch who severed ties with America, the king whose mind unraveled, and the sovereign whose struggles with illness overshadowed many of his decisions. His remarkable reign, lasting from 1760 until 1820, began with hope but gradually became defined by the haunting decline of his mental and physical well-being. This was not a quiet descent. Instead, it unfolded in stark public view, compelling the British monarchy to face a truth it had long concealed: the undeniable reality of incapacitating illness. The initial signs of George's condition emerged subtly: moments of disorientation, erratic mood swings, disjointed speeches, and sleepless nights. These troubling symptoms appeared in the 1780s, well into a period of stable rule. What started as quirky behavior soon escalated into chaotic acts. He would talk incessantly, repeat himself obsessively, and sometimes fail to recognize loved ones. In desperate times, he was restrained and isolated, subjected to 18th century medical treatments that blurred the boundaries of care and confinement. The cause of George III's gradually unraveling health has sparked debate among historians and medical experts. A prominent theory suggests a rare genetic condition known as pheria, affecting the nervous system and leading to confusion, paranoia, and physical distress. This theory connected George to a lineage of concealed afflictions, painting his troubles as the result of hereditary misfortune rather than madness. However, recent scholarship has reconsidered this narrative, proposing instead that he may have encountered something akin to bipolar disorder, a different framework that reflects the nature of his manic episodes more clearly than the supposed genetic ailment. Regardless of the precise diagnosis, George III's struggle was impossible to disguise, not from the court, the populace, or history itself. Over the decades, his episodes ebbed and flowed, and each resurgence left him further diminished. By 1810, after the death of his cherished daughter, Princess Amelia, his health deteriorated irreversibly. This led to the implementation of the Regency Act, enabling his son, subsequently known as George IV, to govern in his stead. The last decade of George's life saw him blind, deaf, and sequestered within the confines of Windsor Castle, isolated from public life. He passed away in 1820, surviving not just his spouse and heir, but the very myth of the indomitable monarch. The historical significance of George III's downfall lies not just in its magnitude but in its visibility. For the first time, the British monarchy confronted the reality of a king incapacitated by mental afflictions rather than political strife. There was no language that could mask this truth or artistically capture it in the manner of a grand portrait. His ordeal was documented in official records, scrutinized by Parliament, and quietly speculated upon in the salons of Europe. Yet, as with many secrets of the past, silence reclaimed its dominion. His descendants rarely uttered his name, relegating him to a cautionary tale in the annals of history. Yet, the unease persisted, especially as members of the royal family began to exhibit their own subtle signs of decline, like his wife, Queen Charlotte, who faded into obscurity, her passing defined by an enigmatic quietness that never made headlines, yet indelibly influenced the legacy she left behind. Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, the consort of George III, lived a life quietly entwined with the tumult of her husband's reign. While his mental health captivated the scrutiny of the public and the state, her own gradual decline went largely unnoticed and undocumented, a familiar plight for many royal women. Spanning nearly 60 years of marriage, she bore 15 children and transformed from a queen into a caregiver, ultimately becoming a relic of her own past. Upon her death in 1818, Charlotte's frail body reflected a life of silent endurance, while her public persona was carefully crafted and shrouded in secrecy. In her youth, Charlotte arrived in Britain as a teenager, filled with dutiful resolve but lacking formal education or preparation for the intense observation of royal life. Her arranged marriage was surprisingly stable, her characteristics pious, loyal, and notably fertile, endearing her to those around her, yet often overshadowing her individuality. As the relentless pressures of court life mounted, alongside the toll of repeated childbirth and her husband's mental unraveling, her health steadily declined. However, this decline was subtle and understated. Chronic fatigue, joint pain, and limited mobility became her daily companions, while louder crises were absent from the narrative of her life. As the years progressed, her communication dwindled, marked by repetition and simplicity, hinting at the cognitive decline some observers noted, which was discussed with gentle detachment typical of royal discourse. Charlotte's struggles, whether from rheumatism, the aftermath of multiple pregnancies, or enduring stress, was seldom the subject of thorough examination. Instead, she became an elegant silhouette within the walls of the court, her silence misconstrued as grace. What is particularly striking is the contrast in the treatment of her suffering compared to that of her husband's madness, which was a subject of public conversation. In contrast, Charlotte's decline was rendered domestic and nearly invisible. Gradually, she withdrew from London into the tranquility of Windsor and, eventually, to Kew. In her later years, her presence dwindled, confining her largely to her private chambers, engaging only with a select few, and making rare public appearances. At her passing in 1818, Charlotte held the title of the longest-serving Queen Consort in British history. Yet her funeral, marked by understated dignity, soon slipped from collective memory. She had witnessed the fall of empires and revolutions, along with the unraveling of her husband's mind, yet left scant personal records of her physical struggles. Her silence, however, was not merely a void. It served as a warning, a pattern that echoed through generations. Just a mere generation later, her granddaughter would ascend the throne, inheriting not just a kingdom but also the same quiet frailty, a sovereign who appeared formidable in portraits yet bore her own hidden struggles behind closed doors. Thus, the cycle continued, perpetuating the narrative of pain obscured by the veil of royalty. Queen Victoria. The woman whose very name became synonymous with a pivotal era, she held the throne for over 60 years. Yet, akin to her grandmother, Queen Charlotte, her physical presence was often obscured in the grand narrative of the empire. The public perception of Victoria was defined by unwavering strength, moral integrity, and nurturing authority. Yet, behind the dark gowns, illustrious portraits, and resounding proclamations of an empire lay a body exhausted from suffering, grief, and a lifetime teetering on fragility. Born in 1819, Victoria was petite and not particularly imposing. However, early images reveal a spirited young woman, wide-eyed and brimming with resolve. Ascending to the throne at just 18, she quickly demonstrated a tenacity far from fragile. Nevertheless, her health was under constant watchful eyes. She endured recurrent episodes of what her doctors described as neuralgia and rheumatism, broad, hazy 19th century terms for persistent, often puzzling, pain in her limbs. Modern historians theorize she might have faced arthritis or chronic venous insufficiency in her later years. By middle age, Victoria increasingly relied on walking sticks and, eventually, wheelchairs. She dealt with painful varicose veins and swelling limbs, her gait slowing and posture shifting. Yet, official documents painted a very different picture. Public appearances were meticulously staged, her speeches often delivered while seated or through proxies. Her attire became more voluminous, providing both a nod to fashion and a means to hide her physical challenges. After the death of her beloved Prince Albert, she spent 40 years as a widow, retreating to Balmoral, Windsor, and Osborne House, her letters from this time filled with mentions of fatigue, aching limbs, and trouble walking. Still, the image of the tireless matriarch of a thriving empire remained intact. Even in old age, she was depicted as a permanent, dignified figure, unchanging and monumental. Yet, behind closed doors, her movements were slow and fraught with pain, often needing support. Her final years were marked by a decline that the royal household was careful to downplay. The grandeur of her funeral in 1901 matched her stature as the Empress of India, but the body revered had been quietly failing for decades. Discussions of her ailments were avoided, treated with euphemistic language and discreet protocols, capturing a carefully curated image, while the reality of her pain lingered in the shadows. This silence was significant, for her son, Edward VII, would not only inherit her throne but a body equally afflicted by illness, a reign characterized by show, grandeur, and hidden struggles, obscured by ceremonial veils. Edward VII, a sovereign sculpted for spectacle, was born to Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, remaining the heir apparent for much of his life, an existence marked by watchful waiting and indulgence. By the time he embraced the crown in 1901 at the age of 59, he had already become a figure rich in contradictions, a socialite with keen diplomatic acumen, a bon vivant burdened by health issues, and a king whose presence filled ceremonial robes that seemed almost too tight. Though he projected an image of rare vitality, actively riding, hunting, and hosting lavish dinners, the reality was much different. Behind the facade of a robust ruler, Edward faced relentless health struggles, largely minimized and overlooked by both the palace and the public. Chronic conditions plague him from middle age, most notably gout, hereditary in nature and exacerbated by his excessive lifestyle. This affliction led to swollen joints, particularly in his feet, straining his ability to walk at times, shrouding his debilitating pain in phrases such as minor indisposition when he cancelled engagements. Smoking was another vice, with Edward often indulging in over 20 cigarettes and a dozen cigars daily, resulting in persistent respiratory issues. Physicians reported his wheezing and shortness of breath, which often interrupted his speeches, though official narratives failed to disclose any respiratory illness, insisting instead on maintaining the royal mystique. As the years progressed, Edward's obesity became more apparent, not just visually but also in its toll on his health. His weight difficulties led to sleep disorders, restricted movement, and heart strain, compelling royal staff to make special accommodations for him. During public appearances, Edward's discomfort was masked by carefully arranged pauses, preserving the illusion that a sizable king represented strength, as long as the hardships behind his bulk remained hidden. Strikingly, the monarchy expertly reframed Edward's declining health. His physical challenges became mere reflections of duty and hardy English living, while his labored breathing was portrayed as a natural element of aging and statesmanship. Chronic illness had no place in their narrative, despite its visible impact. However, Edward managed an active schedule, traveling widely and engaging in successful diplomatic affairs, all while ignoring medical advice and resisting necessary lifestyle changes, supported by physicians who often seemed more protective of his image than attentive to his health. In May 1910, after suffering multiple heart attacks, Edward continued to work unyieldingly. He reportedly collapsed mid-conversation, ultimately passing away at Buckingham Palace at 68. Though officially reported as heart failure, the reality was shaped by years of neglected health issues cloaked beneath royal grandeur. Edward VII's legacy was not merely one of a redefined monarchy but also one of an intricate art of concealing illness behind a veneer of strength. This legacy established the modern royal prototype, elegant yet meticulously controlled from the neck up, while the burdens that lay beneath were passed down. His son, George V, already grappling with chronic bronchitis, would carry this weight forward, and the subsequent generation would face its own tests of royal perfection, burdened not just by physical ailments, but the struggle to maintain a composed facade in the face of chronic decline. George IV was a monarch whose physicality never aligned with the crown he desired so fervently. His wait for kingship spanned nearly 6 decades, making him the longest-serving heir in British history until that time. When he finally ascended the throne in 1820, his health had deteriorated, burdened by his insatiable appetites. His rule was characterized by opulence and extravagance, but beneath the opulent surface lay a body that was a tightly held secret of the monarchy. Born in 1762 as the firstborn of George III, young George was seen as charming and fashionable. He embraced his role as Prince of Wales with flair, adorning himself in finery, cultivating an impressive art collection, and indulging in a party lifestyle that made the Georgian court the envy of the continent. Yet this exuberance devolved into a battle against overindulgence. By his 40s, the effects of his lifestyle were evident. He was clinically obese, with each step becoming increasingly burdensome. Custom-tailored clothing was required to accommodate his expanding physique, and his limitations became increasingly apparent, especially as public appearances dwindled. He would often be seen seated or within the confines of a carriage, his physical presence shrouded in strategic obscurity. The disparity between the public's perception of him as a robust ruler and the truth of his declining health grew ever more pronounced. His ailments were numerous, from the debilitating pain of gout that affected his joints to chronic bladder issues that plague him continually. His once vibrant body began to wither. By the late 1820s, he struggled to walk at all, with descriptions of him as grotesquely swollen and laboring to breathe. Yet the royal household maintained a facade, offering vague explanations of temporary illness rather than confronting the grim reality. George's extravagant meals were notorious, characterized by excessive alcohol and rich foods, leading him to consume opiates to alleviate his suffering. Despite his rapid decline, George IV was not oblivious to the perception of his image. He refrained from mirrors and realistic portrayals, orchestrating flattering lighting to shape public viewings. The monarchy, preoccupied with preserving its dignity, abetted this charade. Ironically, the self-declared connoisseur of elegance ended his life largely restricted to the confines of Windsor Castle, unable to bear the very physicality required of him as king. Public engagements became shorter or cancelled altogether. He passed away in 1830 at age 67, his death resulting from heart failure amidst a myriad of other failing organs, his legacy whispered rather than celebrated. His reign was brief, overshadowed by the scandal of his health that fueled gossip. He left a legacy more defined by architecture than governance, with structures like Brighton Pavilion and Carlton House reflecting contradictions. Yet in decline, George IV forged a legacy that resonated through the House of Windsor, a testament to the notion that a royal body transcends mere flesh. It serves as a canvas, a symbol upon which a nation projects its myths. His suffering didn't go unacknowledged. It was curated, manipulated, and ultimately obscured. Yet this erasure bore a heavy cost, one that future generations would confront, especially as they faced the invisible spectre of blood disorders, the royal lineage burdened by frailty, where even a minor bruise could spell catastrophe.